Commissioner Barry, I'm assuming you're having problems with your camera again? You're on mute, by the way. Well, he still has another minute. We'll wait.
He did have his camera on earlier when he first came in.
Thanks, Malia. I knew he was having problems earlier. It looks like Commissioner Fowler is on. Commissioner Barry, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Sorry, I'm not familiar with this platform, so it took me a second, but I'm on and ready.
We just need Commissioner Barry to come off of mute. I just sent him a text. Let's give him a minute.
Malia, can you have a look at that unverified piece, because that may be part of the problem. If you just hover over that and look at what that says, I don't know if you can admit him.
Hello?
There he goes.
Oh, wait, there's another button.
So the unverified part just means that they don't have a Microsoft Teams account. So they're joining from like an outside organization.
Okay, so that just took a little.
Yeah. Sorry, I am also
Connecting.
getting over a cold.
Oh, wait, okay.
Commissioner Barry, you're up.
I am, hold on, my computer, I just lost you guys again. I switched computers because the one that I tried to meet with Connie on this morning with, there it is. The video wasn't working. Oh no, disappeared again. Doggone it. No, it's not showing up on there. Oh, that's where. Okay. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Let me pull up my agenda because I'm using the computer that I was going to look at the agenda on to do this meeting. The agenda. There. Okay. Good morning, everybody. It is 11:02 a.m. on Thursday, November 21st, 2024. This is the Men's Safety Committee meeting. We've got the recording going. I got a notification when I logged on. Is that right?
Yes, it is going.
Okay. I think the first thing to do is roll call. I see Commissioner Fowler on here, and I don't think I see Connie, and is Mike around somewhere?
Mike is seasonal now. He's not on. He actually was thinking about getting on, but he's out of power right now, so he's not able to get on at all.
Okay. Is that everybody who's like officially part of the committee, I think? Okay. Okay. Rod, Dr. Stein, I see a bunch of folks on here. Hoping you guys will join this. we want to get through the agenda thoroughly, but without undue delay. So if anybody has comments of more than a minute or so, let's just hold them. We're going to get to this stuff during commission meetings and further down the line. Today we want to get through our agenda. So that's roll call. We don't need to approve roll call or anything like that. I don't think, do we? Approval of the meeting agenda. Commissioner Fowler, would you like to approve the meeting agenda?
Yes.
Okay, I'll second my own. That's probably not per the rules or Hoyle, but the agenda is solid. First item, old
And I'm-
business. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Connie.
I'm glad to explain the first item that's on here, which is discussion of recent EIA events and current Coggins review, if you'd like.
That'd be wonderful.
Great. And just for those of you that don't know, Dr. Harvey Stein is our newest commissioner and has joined us. And will be participating. He's not officially a member of this committee yet, but that will change for the next meeting. So we will be calling on him for his opinions on many of these things, I'm sure. EIA, I think everybody on this call knows what EIA is. If you don't, let me know. Equine and infectious, no, I can't think of the, anyway. We do Coggins testing for this. The current, for many of you that have been around for a long, and I'm getting over a cold and jet lag, so I'm a little off right now, so please bear with me. Years ago at Portland Meadows, not that many years ago, we did have a positive Coggins test. And at that time, we had changed our rules to not just go with the state, but go with a 6-month requirement for Coggins. I don't remember what else was involved in that because I wasn't on the track side at the time. It has since reverted back to an annual requirement as per what the state's requirement is. This item came up when I was talking to Dr. Stein at the track. He's already made it out to Grants Pass and spent a weekend out there. But this is something that we may want to look at changing or proposing a new rule for. And this is just for open discussion. And again, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Stein afterwards. So some very specific things that several people have brought up to me, including Dr. Lombard, is some things that we need to consider is, do we just want to test horses that are coming from out of state, or do we want to be more realistic that a lot of these horses are all going out of state at some point or another? And what is the correct length of time? Now, I think everybody that knows that the recent outbreaks that happened was all related to one specific barn. As far as I know, there was no other cases. So this may be a moot issue, but it's certainly something that we want to talk about and see how we feel. And with that, with your permission, Commissioner Berry, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Stein to talk about this and get his input.
Please, Dr. Stein, it's a pleasure to meet you, and we're looking forward to your opinions.
Okay. I've got a bit of an echo. I don't know if you guys are hearing an echo. Okay, great. The cases were with quarter horses at Los Alamitos that originated in New Mexico and Texas, apparently. The current requirements in Oregon are 1-year testing. That some states are 6 months. And I think because so much there is mixing, because we don't have a year-round circuit. So a lot of horses are coming from Arizona, Idaho, etc. A 1-year test doesn't make a whole lot of sense because, for example, a horse could be tested in December, come into Oregon in June with what's considered a current Coggins, stay in Oregon until December or November and leave. And all of that is, let's say, legal under Oregon health standards. It's not a contagious disease, but it is spread generally through biting insects, or apparently in the case that we had at Los Alamitos, I mean, the horses that arrived from New Mexico and Texas, was what's called iatrogenic, which means it was transferred by needle, probably. So, I mean, in looking at it, I would say that if you did at minimum 6 months and possibly 3 months, that way you don't get these horses that might have come in, been at a farm, etc. Because what you don't want are positive cases that could potentially, I won't say shut down a meet, but could, wreak havoc on a meet.
What's a Coggins
Good
going
morning,
for?
Dr. Stein. Oh,
Oh, sorry.
Can I say
Go ahead,
something,
Commissioner
Mr.
Fowler,
Berry?
please.
Thanks. It's nice to meet you, Dr. Stein. I mean, sort of meet you. I think in other areas, a 6-month Coggins or a 6-month health certificate. I'm trying to think when I compete my horse, it's much more than a year. So I would support it being at least a 6-month. But I also wanted to comment that you appear to be signed on here twice, and that might be why you're.
That's why I'm probably got
hearing
the echo.
Echo. Yeah.
I thought I had deleted it, but if you want, I can sign off completely and come back.
I can't
That's up
hear
to you.
an echo.
We don't hear an echo.
looks,
So.
yeah, it looks like
Okay.
you're muted on one and your voice is going through the other. So I think you're okay.
Okay.
One other question I had for you, Dr. Stein, before we open up to everyone else to add their input on this, is what are your thoughts about testing like the pony horses and everyone else? Should it be all horses?
All horses. There's no reason, because a lot of barns are going to transfer with their pony horses anyway, and they're in constant contact. So yeah, every equine.
And then with your permission, Commissioner Berry, can we open it up to everyone else for their thoughts?
Yep, I think that's a great idea. Is anybody concerned about cost with increasing the frequency of testing?
Wait, Dr. Lombard had her hand up.
Oh,
I just to educate everybody super quickly. So Coggins is a simple blood test. It has to be tested by the state lab that is approved to do so. A veterinarian has to pull the blood. So as far as those horses need to see a vet to have this happen, and it costs between $80 and $100 depending on what time of year, how fast you want it back, things like that. The Oregon Department of Agriculture state veterinarians switched at the same time that Portland Meadows did to requiring our Coggins be within 6 months for horses transferring from out of state into Oregon for a period of time from when we had that one positive at Portland Meadows. Just recently, the Oregon Department of Agriculture has now said, if you're coming in from out of state, you're good for a year on a Coggins. So just so everybody knows what's normal. If you're coming in from out of state, you also have to have a health certificate. And there are different levels of those, whether they're international health certificates, so you can go to Canada with them too. For example, if you only want a 30-day health certificate or a 6-month. But those range anywhere. I mean, international is quite a bit more expensive, but you're looking at another $60, maybe $70 for that health certificate for those horses. So if the horse is in Oregon and they're traveling around to shows and things like that, there is no requirement for Coggins. This was a requirement that the Racing Commission made a rule about to say that you need to have a Coggins to run. So that's just kind of the history of where our Coggins, positive Coggins before was and where we are now. And then my other comment is we got to figure out who's in charge, what's the protocol for making sure these horses that are entering a not secured backside do have their Coggins. So it's one thing to say you have to have a Coggins with whatever time you all decide, and I would suggest 6 months, but whatever gets decided, it's easy to say, well, you can't run, you can't enter, you can't race if the racing office secretary doesn't confirm that your Coggins is up to date for whatever that date period is. But who's going to be in charge of going around and making sure every horse on the backside, which I agree, they should have a negative Coggins to be on the backside, but that's just another piece of the protocol that complicates things a little bit. Whose role in regulating that is.
Rod, go ahead, man.
Yeah, so as you know, I've been involved in horse racing for a very long time, and I've been involved in all of these Coggins tests and positives, negatives. So to answer a couple of questions, number one, our backside stable manager this year, it was Twyla Beckner, was in charge as horses came in, that she went around, made sure that they had Coggins when they got on the grounds. Those Coggins were then turned into the race office. And then from there on, of course, if they didn't have Coggins and they weren't legal to be on the grounds, they didn't get to race. So, and then we also monitor those Coggins tests of which ones come due during the race meet in order for them to get retested at that time. The thing about the incident that happened, like it was already mentioned, it was one barn, it was one trainer. He spread his horses. He was in New Mexico. He spread his horses to Texas, New Mexico, and to La Salle, and took horses that were infected all of those places. There was no other horses that I know of that were infected from those horses that he had on the ground. It's an incident that he did. However, that happened in his barn. It happened in his barn. And I'm not going to try to speculate or tell you what I think happened, but it was his barn and his barn alone. And the main places most of this is coming from is the match racing industry, which is illegal, for match racers to do that, because they have a tendency to use needles. I'm not, more than likely it's involved in a human form of using needles or the same needles on horses and getting infected. I would open this up to Dr. Lombard, but the possibility of a fly biting a horse and then biting another horse, or a mosquito, is very rare or very far-fetched in my opinion. These are all human acts. And I think we got to be careful how much, we don't want to put a burden on the horses or the horsemen for the cost, because it does get costly, especially when these large barns have many horses to do this with. I think we got to keep in mind what's other states. Again, I'm always going back to what other states are doing around us. And as far as I know, all the other states around us are 1 year. And I think this one incident that happened to a trainer in New Mexico shouldn't just regulate Oregon because of an incident in Mexico that didn't happen here.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Any horses coming into the state of Oregon should have had a Coggins within 6 months. Is that correct, or do I have that wrong?
It's 1 year now.
1
It was
year.
6 months for,
It's
it was
one-
6 months for years and years. Right after the Portland Meadows single positive test, it switched to 6 months. It's now back to 1 year. Just recently.
Okay. It sounds to me, because I don't want to belabor this, like the veterinarians are in agreement that 1 year is inadequate, 6 months makes more sense, and it's probably the best compromise between price and effectiveness we're going to find. Anybody?
There's
Randy
there's
has-
nothing,
Randy
there's
has his
nothing
hand
that's
up.
going to be 100%, because it takes about 60 days
True.
of incubation period for a horse to show up. Is that correct, Dr. Lombard?
60 to 90.
60 to 90 days.
Mhm,
So you could have a horse tested, he
mhm.
could be negative, but really be positive. and come to your racetrack. So
And we can go down the rabbit hole of this much further. If they test negative, they're unlikely to be infectious to other horses at that time. Now, then they mount the infection and then they become infectious. So there's a lot of epidemiology behind all of that, but you are right. You can test negative and still be infected.
Nobody
Well-
panic. And I'm just saying this, if we went to an every 90, if a 3-month test window, and the horsemen could find a way maybe to create an efficiency where they had a clinic day and just everybody ran through and got their horses drawn at a race meet, I don't know, would that, because yeah, if we've got a 90-day incubation period potentially, and again, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but since it comes up, from an epidemiological standpoint, does a 90-day window make sense?
So just to maybe put this in a little bit better perspective. So the actual numbers, I just pulled them up. I used to have them off the top of my head, but in 2020 in the US, there were 1.4 million horses tested for Coggins and 29 positive horses out of that 1.3 million. So I'm not saying that we need to say this isn't a thing that we need to deal with, but I don't want to blow it out of proportion either. One of the reasons we do the Coggins testing and have done it for as long as we have is to attempt to eradicate it from the US. And the testing has done a pretty good job of that. And then there are the, whatever you want to call them, the bad actors that we end up with a group of positive horses all at once that puts us on edge. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be requiring Coggins, but let's not get too far down the rabbit hole on this.
Yeah. What do both of our vets, do we have, Dr. Stein, Dr. Lombard, what would you guys recommend?
We have one other vet on the call too, Commissioner Barry.
Oh, who
You
else
may
do we-
not have seen it, but Dr.
Dr.
Manhart
Bean.
is also on.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I'm sorry, I came in on the phone late, so anyway, I would almost go with the Oregon Department of Agriculture's recommendations, which is yearly. Because the incidents and things like Dr. Lombard said is, all the millions tested, and typically it's in pockets when it happens, because of bad actors and things like that. But to start, I think 90 days is excessive. And even if our Department of Agriculture says 1 year, I have no issues with that. And that's,
And I
or
think
you
we
have, go ahead.
go the step further. We go the step further because the Department of Agriculture says if you're in Oregon, you don't have to test. I think
Right.
if you're racing in Oregon, I think you do have to test. But we
You
still
should-
follow
you
that
should-
here.
And pony horses as well, and making
Yes.
sure that we tight.
Yes.
Is there anybody from the fair meets who could speak? Rod spoke well to how implementing that would look at Grants Pass, but what would that look like at the fair meets? Getting the pony.
I
horses
think that's
tested.
where it goes back to our protocols and procedures of, I mean, I don't know which fair meets you've all been to, but horses show up at Union. You've also got all the rodeo horses out there. We're just trying to find what stalls we can put them in, right? Not necessarily checking all their papers. So knowing that they have a Coggins to enter to run is the first step. But what if you're bringing your 2-year-olds to start training on? You've got your pony horses. So there needs to be a protocol put in place.
Okay. Okay.
Commissioner,
Anything else? Oh, sorry,
Commissioner
go ahead.
Barry, Mr. Bowden has had his hand up for some time.
Oh, Randy, I apologize, Mr. Bowden. Go
Yeah,
ahead, man.
it's Bodine. Somebody's got to get there.
Bodine.
Yeah, thank you. Anyway, no. And Rod covered most of it, but be aware that, I'm not down on what the vet is saying in regard to 6 months, totally that way, but we did this change based on the Department of Agriculture and the surrounding states so that everybody matched up. And that was the commission's rationale behind doing it back then, was that it brought everybody into a unified line to draw from, because it gets confusing for the horsemen when you come back and forth. Oh, well, I was good here, but now I'm not good there. And so, just for whatever that part of it's worth, but this was something we had this conversation when the Department of Agriculture went to a year, and we looked around us and they were all at a year, that was what prompted the decision to go from 6 months to a year in the first place.
Makes sense. Do we have any more to discuss on this at the committee level? I feel like we've had a pretty good conversation. I feel like I have a pretty good grasp of the pros and cons to give in my report to the chair later on today. Anybody else have anything that hasn't been touched on? Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. This has been informative. Moving on. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just want to add for your report this afternoon that the New Mexico Racing Commission has had a hearing on the issue in New Mexico, and the results of that have not been made public as far as I know yet. So it's an interesting thing to wait to see what they do.
Absolutely, absolutely. We don't want to be rash by any means, and we need to find out what has actually gone on. Okay. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Connie, do you want to discuss? We talked a little bit this morning about laboratories. You want to go through that real quickly?
I think we skipped one, which is the
Oh,
anti-inflammatories.
Oh, the NSAIDs.
As you all remember, at the end of last year, before we started the season, we were debating on how we wanted to change the rule on anti-inflammatories. Right now, we have a 24-hour requirement that is not in line with most other places. Washington, ARCI are all 48 hours. One of the sticking points that we were having is, do we change it to 48 hours but not change the dose, or do we change it to 48 hours and change the dose? I would like to hear, I know Dr. Lombard has a lot to say about this, so I'm going to start with her succinctly, and then I'd like to hear what Dr. Stein has to say on this.
I think the idea of going to 48 hours, especially with the timing of when we do vet checks in Oregon because of the fair meets and scheduling, is very appropriate. I think the threshold level should be the same as it has been, and we just move it out to 48 hours. Is that succinct enough?
I agree. How succinct is that?
Any other discussion on that?
Okay.
Yeah, that was easy. Next discussion, I will take this one on since you've already informed me that I will be. We use the lab, which has been accredited by, all those other acronyms out there. Chicago, Illinois University of Chicago, to be doing our testing. Excuse me. With the exception, I'm trying not to talk, but I'm not good at not talking. With the exception of hair testing, which we use Berkeley for. That lab has come under some scrutiny recently, and they believe that they will retain their certification and will be fine. But it did cause myself and Karen Parkman to go on a little bit of a rush to see what other options we had in the case that they did lose their accreditation. We reached out to Berkeley. We had a great discussion with them. Their testing is more expensive.
Do you mean Davis?
Davis.
Yes.
They are, thank you, Karen. They are more expensive, but they also test for a greater level of substances. One of the thoughts that we had after discussion with several people was, there's a couple possibilities. Number one is we could just stay like we are and assume that this lab will be fine. Another was we could completely get rid of this lab and go to a new lab. Or a third possibility, which I think we're thinking about, and I'll be interested to say, especially what our three doctors on here have to say, is perhaps that we have two labs. We have a primary lab, which will be Chicago, provided they keep their accreditation. And then occasionally, and that's to be determined, maybe every 4 times or something else, we send a sample to Berkeley or Davis instead, kind of a test sample to see how they're going. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Dr. Lombard. Or,
Dr. Stein and I actually just talked about this yesterday. I think we're both kind of on the page of having a referee option. But how that looks, do we just then sometimes send the sample to Davis instead? Or do we send it to both and see if we're getting the same answers and results, which again adds cost, but it kind of helps us figure out what that referee looks like. And then I don't know what the bureaucracy of it all is. Does our referee lab always have to be the same one? Could we send it to Texas A&M sometimes? Could we send it to Davis sometimes? Could we send it to Industrial sometimes? Like, does that contract have to be?
Well, that's a question, and that we can work into. Karen can actually address that. I think the biggest concern is we have to have a contract with them, which causes us to go through procurement. So if we had 4 different contracts, it could be a lot of extra paperwork for us, and they may not be willing to do it if they're not getting enough business. I'm going to let Karen jump in here before Dr. Stein, just because you may have something on the technical side as well. Go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, so I just want to be careful with how we're using the word referee, because generally that's when the licensee is sending their sample out to challenge us. So I think they have the right to send it anywhere they want, really. I think if we stick with University of Illinois, and then we sometimes go to another lab, we're not going to have consistency.
Well,
So
that's
the persons whose sample got sent to UC Davis, now maybe they have a higher level of being able to find things where
well, and that's why I
University of
think the
Illinois
idea.
doesn't. So now we have people who are upset because my sample and they're picking on me versus
Yeah,
the consistency.
I think that's where the recommendation came in from Dr. Lombard, which I agree with, is maybe the better option is to send it to both.
No.
Right.
are there any issues financially with doing both? I mean, obviously it's going to cost something, but what's it do for the bottom line? Does anybody know at this point?
We're
Well,
talking
sending the
hundreds,
same-
not.
If we're sending the same test to 2 labs, it doubles the cost of that test, whatever the base cost is, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, we could be a few extra thousand, but it's
We're not
totally worth
gonna
it for
break the
testing.
kitty.
It's not going to break the
If we-
bank.
If we're not going to break the kitty, my recommendation to the commission would be, let's do both every time if it's not going to be.
Yeah, I don't think that's financially
Mm-mm.
responsible to do it every time. And I turn over, Dr. Stein, do you want to?
Yeah, what they did in California when I was a state vet many decades ago is the contract lab was Truesdale and Iowa was you might say, the referee. And that was, samples were sent there unbeknownst to anyone except really the testing, that it was done kind of in secret. It's not as if Horstman had any idea whether their samples were being sent to, but it was a way for the state to see how valid Truesdale was. And if Iowa was finding things that Truesdale didn't find, then at least they had an idea that maybe Truesdale wasn't the lab they wanted to continue with. And of course, that after that, UC Davis, that they built up that lab because of the problems they had with Truesdale. Again, the costs may be different between all these labs, but what you want is a lab that's efficient and is finding things that horsemen are using. Cost is important, but shouldn't be the deciding fact. And horsemen really have nothing to say about where their samples are sent originally. The states contract with it, and if a sample is positive, it's positive. It's not as if oh, well, I got lucky and I went to a different lab. Eventually, we would find out which lab is most efficient.
Do we have, they may lose their licensing, it sounds like, but do we have any concerns ourselves about University of Chicago? Do we think they're doing it inadequate? I mean, we don't know. Okay.
We don't know what we don't know.
We don't know what we don't know. Tough to prove a negative, dang. Okay. So maybe a proposal, oh, sorry, Dr. Lombard, go ahead. I see your hand there.
This is maybe a question for Karen, maybe more than we want to talk about right now, but do we still have contracted other labs that when a horseman gets a positive test and they get to send off their split, they get to choose from a list of labs? Because back in the day when we were using Truesdale, we had a contract with Industrial and
Industrial.
Texas, I think.
Mhm.
And the horseman could choose, no, send my split back to Truesdale or send it to one of the others.
Yeah,
And
they
that's
can.
how the contract is done.
Industrial has been the most common one, and they just have to pay for wherever it's going on their referee test. Mhm.
So we do have a little bit of a relationship with those other labs still. kind of.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Anybody? Oh, Malia has her hand up and down, but she bumped it.
If I can unmute here really quick.
Oh,
My question is very minor. So if we're sending to 2 different labs, because my brain's going to instantly think in the test barn, does that count as your regular and your split, or would we also be then taking a 3rd sample to hold on to it as the split?
There still needs to be a horseman sample in the fridge.
Okay, so minor increase of supplies cost, but that's minor. Okay, that's all I was wondering.
Before we clean this topic up,
Quick
Dr.
question, Connie.
yeah,
Oh,
Randy
sorry.
has.
Yeah, no, just in my, everything you guys said, fine, perfect with me. The only other consideration is the timing that's involved. Because in the case of some of the fairs, I think we had it, the place we had it before we went to these people, we weren't getting tests back for like 5 weeks. And it creates a big burden on the horsemen because they can't get paid until the tests come back, positive, negative, whatever. So it's just another consideration to, for you to think about as you start moving around.
And that's one of the reasons, Randy, why we specifically talked to Davis, because we believe that Davis could be faster. We don't know. So testing it out could actually show us that as well. Because if we could get something where we were getting it back in half the amount of time, I think the horsemen would appreciate that.
Yeah,
I'll
no
tell you,
question.
But we don't know what we don't know yet.
It sounds to
Private
me
practice,
like
Davis.
it sounds to me like a little more research and then maybe a couple of proposals for the commissioners to take a look at the full commission meeting, and move forward from there. Do we want to come back and discuss this some more in the Med and Safety committee? What do people think?
So before I turn it over to Dr. Stein, which I will, I promise, I would just say that the one thing that I think we all have agreed on, if I could summarize this, to take to the commission, is that we do believe that it's appropriate to look into a second facility and to the discretion of the ORC on if we run it at both or not to begin
And the
with.
goal is to have the most valid, most quickly returned samples possible, or tests possible. And everybody, we have consensus there. Okay.
Yeah, Dr. Stein had his hand up.
Well, yeah,
Go ahead,
point of
Dr.
clarification. So the horsemen
I see it here.
don't get paid until the results come back? Okay, because
Correct.
many other states have a 72-hour when they pay, and if a positive comes back after that, then they have to claw back that money. I mean, I don't know, but that's how New York does it. That's most states that I know of actually do it that way. So I just wanted to see what, if that apparently is an issue.
Karen and then Randy, maybe? Can we do, is that? can we
Yeah,
do it in
and
that
I think
order?
after that, we wrap it up and go to the next topic.
I think it's a good plan.
Yeah, it just occurred to me in my brain that if we use 2 labs, we would just send all samples on a given day to the same lab. And then the next time to the other lab versus mixing and matching samples from one meet or a selected person's sample. It would just be every sample goes there this time, every sample goes there next time. That would be one way
I
to
think that'd be
mitigate
one of
that.
the options that the commissioners would like to look at in the full commission meeting, probably. That makes sense. Karen, anything else?
Nope.
Cool. Randy, go ahead, man. Randy's got it covered? Okay.
No, to be absolute, just to give you the absolute correct information, for the commercial meat, for the thoroughbreds, we guarantee all the purses with the exception of the stakes races. So in that particular case, the horsemen don't have to wait. They can get paid that night if they want to. And just, FYI, we've been doing that for several years now, and loudly knocking on wood, we've never had a test come back that we've had to go collect on.
Sounds like if they ain't broke, don't fix it from your perspective, Randy.
Yeah, I mean, it's worked out fine that way. I mean, and it's
Long time. That's not even what we're talking about.
And to be clear, when Randy says we guarantee, he's talking about the Horsemen's Association.
Association.
oh yeah, I'm sorry, the HBPA, yeah.
Yeah. Got it. Good. Okay.
Unfortunately, the Quarter Horse Association does not have the budget to be able to guarantee the purses, and so that becomes a difficult thing. We do have a major race that generally requires hair testing at the end of the commercial meet, and so those samples would be probably sent to, and we've had a number of calls saying, I can't get my money. And so it's something that we have to take into consideration, is the promptness of the return of those tests. Hair testing has made that more difficult for labs to be able to process those as rapidly as urine and blood tests.
Is
Yes, but-
this one of those to put a pin in as closely related but not quite the same as which labs we use and when? Paybacks? Because it seems relevant.
There's a lot of backside comment on that lab couldn't find this barn, the other lab couldn't, it just goes on. And so there's been a lot of, particularly in the Midwest, there's been a lot of comment on the ability of different labs to find different compounds.
Yes, but we did have a very recent, in fact, it was just last year, we had a case where the hair testing came back and after the trials, and there was a clenbuterol found in the horse, and therefore the horse couldn't run in the finals. So it, if that's the case, we don't want them running in the finals if they've got clenbuterol.
I'm going to move on to the next. We're going to talk more about all this stuff. This is far from a closed matter, but good discussion for today. I appreciate it. Treatments within 48 hours of racing. We've touched on this a little bit. Do we have more specific therapies that we want to look at in greater detail? Because last time we met, as I recall, we were open to discussion of all these things. We just didn't have specific concerns that we wanted to vet. Are we?
Commissioner Barry, as I remember it, we decided that it would be best to take these one by one. So my question is, do we want to take each one of those? Do we just want to pick one of these for this meeting since we have a lot, defer the rest of them to the next meeting? How would you like to do that?
Well, I guess to me, it really depends on who has concerns about them and how long they'd like to speak about each one individually. When I look at these at face value, I'm not personally concerned about any of these, but if somebody has concerns about them that I should know about and the commission should know about, I'd like to address those as in-depth as we need to. Anybody want to talk about nebulizers, electromagnetic blankets, whirlpool boots, lasers, pulse electromagnetic fields, or acupuncture? Okay.
We have one.
Well, can I just,
Oh,
yeah,
did
very
Okay.
briefly, I promise.
Yeah, no.
I think if we're gonna do this, I think it should be within 24 hours, just like any other treatments in horses. I'm not sure why we are gonna call any of these out. Particularly, we could argue till the end of time with all the experts in the world and have different answers about whether one works better at 12 hours or 72 hours. But basically, I don't see any harm in any of these being used at 24 hours.
The
I
only
think
one that I
Dr.
see on
Stein-
there myself, lasers get used a lot of different ways in medicine. I
Mhm.
mean, there may be specific laser intervention. I don't want to treat lasers as a broad category though. Are there any specific concerns about specific laser procedures?
Again, we can go down a pretty deep rabbit hole about this and talk about them as, class 4 versus class 3 lasers versus, I don't really think any of those should necessarily be used within 24 hours. And that, I think, covers most of that.
Is
Rather
there a way to
than
tell if they have been used
nitpicking.
within 24 hours? Would we have any kind of ability to oversee that? And I mean, practically speaking, certainly we can make a rule.
Oh.
Well,
No, I don't think
ARCI
there's any, excuse me. I don't think there's any way to practically tell if anything has been used except potentially nebulizers. And if you put any treatment into a nebulizer, that would show up on your drug testing. So, but the other things, it would be very hard to monitor or manage. And typically they're not performance enhancing and they can't mask things.
Okay, then I
Well
think
said.
this committee remains open to any specific concerns about any specific treatment or intervention that we may learn about or learn consequences of or implications of or whatever. Right now, it doesn't sound like we have specific concerns about any of these. Although if anyone used any of these tools to give a horse medication somehow, that would fall under the medication rules that we currently have. That sound, yeah? Okay. Any further discussion on that? Excellent. Public comment? All right. Hey, public, thank you for all the comments you've already made. Really appreciate everybody's insights. Commissioner Fowler, would you care to make a motion to adjourn?
I will move to adjourn.
I will second your motion to adjourn. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you at the meeting at 1:30.